I had exactly $22,000 saved in an account I had been building quietly for 5 years. Nobody in my family knew the exact number, but they knew I was careful with money. They knew I worked overtime. They knew I said no to vacations and new clothes and dinners out because I had something I was working toward. I was 31 years old, I had a man I loved who had proposed to me 6 months before, and I had a plan. What I did not have was any idea that while I was working a double shift on the last Saturday of March, my parents were sitting at a kitchen table across town, moving my money into a different account to pay for my younger sister's surprise engagement party, her venue deposit, and a wedding dress she had pointed to in a magazine. I found out not from them. I found out from a bank notification on my phone. And the moment I read that number, the balance that should have said 22,000 and now said $412, I felt something leave my body that I have never fully described to anyone. It was not just shock. It was the end of a story I had been telling myself about my family for my entire life. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. Think about the account you protect. Think about the sacrifice behind it, the lunches you skipped, the trips you passed on, the version of yourself that said not yet so that one day you could say finally. Now ask yourself honestly, if someone took that, not a stranger but your own parents, what would you do? Would you stay quiet to keep the peace? Would you demand it back and burn every bridge, or would you do something else entirely? Stay with Patricia's story, because what she chose surprised even the people who thought they knew her best. My name is Patricia. I am going to tell you this story the way I wish someone had told me a story like it years ago, simply, honestly, and without leaving out the parts that made me look slow or too trusting or too soft for too long. Because the truth is, I was all of those things, and then I wasn't. Let me start at the beginning, not the dramatic beginning, but the real one. I grew up in a house where love was not measured equally. I understood this very early, the way children understand things they cannot name yet. My younger sister Renee was the sparkle in every room she entered. She was funny and loud and magnetic, and when she laughed, my parents laughed. When she cried, everything stopped. I was the older one, the steady one, the one teachers called reliable and adults called mature, and my parents called helpful in a tone that somehow made the word feel like an assignment rather than a compliment. I am not saying my parents did not love me. I am saying that their love for me was mostly expressed through expectation, and their love for Renee was mostly expressed through attention. There is a difference between those two things. One feels like a warm hand on your back, the other feels like a clipboard someone is always carrying near you. By the time I was 16, I had a part-time job at a pharmacy. I contributed to groceries when things were tight. I babysat neighbor kids on weekends and gave a portion of that money to my mother without being asked because I had been raised to believe that was what a good daughter did. Renee was 14 and she was in a dance program that cost $400 a month. I never said a word about that. I genuinely did not think I was supposed to. At 23, I moved into my own apartment. My parents threw Renee a sweet 16 party that summer with a rented hall, a photo booth, and a custom cake. I was not given a sweet 16 party. I was given a card and a hug, and a $20 bill slipped inside. I remember telling myself that I was too old to feel hurt by that, and I also remember that I cried in the bathroom of my apartment that night anyway. I am giving you this background not to make you angry at my parents, though I understand if you already are. I am giving it to you because it is the soil that grew the situation I eventually found myself standing in. When a pattern is repeated long enough, it stops feeling like a pattern. It starts feeling like weather. You dress for it, you adjust, you do not expect it to change because it never has. By 26, I had a job I had worked hard for. I was an office manager at a mid-sized property management company. It was not glamorous, but it was mine. I was organized, I was trusted, I was good at my work. And I had started building something very quiet and private in the background. I opened a savings account separate from my checking. I set up automatic transfers. Every month without fail, a set amount left my main account and went somewhere my mother could not call me about and my father could not borrow from. Because yes, that had happened before, a loan that was called a loan but never came back. Over 5 years, that account grew to 22,000. Ours, I did not tell anyone the exact number. I had learned that lesson. But I did tell my mother during a phone call one November that I was saving for my future. She said that was smart. She said I had always been the responsible one. She said it like it was a compliment. I smiled and told her thank you and did not explain that by then, the compliment felt like being praised for being useful furniture. When Daniel proposed to me in January of that year, I felt genuinely happy for the first time in a long time. Daniel was calm and thoughtful, and he had been beside me through some of my hardest seasons. He proposed in the kitchen of our shared apartment, no grand gesture, just him with a ring and a sentence that made me cry in the best way. We were engaged. We had a plan. We would marry the following spring, something small and meaningful, somewhere outside if the weather held, with the people we actually loved around us. I told my parents the next day. My mother cried. My father shook Daniel's hand and said he was a good man. Renee texted me 17 exclamation marks and said she wanted to be my maid of honor. It felt warm. It felt like a page turning. Renee had been dating a man named Marcus for about 2 years. He was fine. Quiet, a little awkward, not someone she had ever spoken about with particular urgency. So when she called me 3 weeks after my engagement to tell me that Marcus had proposed, I was genuinely happy for her. I told her so, I meant it. What I did not anticipate was what happened in the 7 days that followed that phone call. My mother called me 4 times in one week. Each conversation was about Renee, the venue Renee had seen, the dress Renee had loved, the engagement party Marcus's family was expecting. Each conversation ended with some version of my mother saying things are moving so fast and we want to make sure Renee feels celebrated. I listened. I agreed that Renee deserved to feel celebrated. I offered to help coordinate ideas. I thought we were talking about helping. I did not think we were talking about my account. On the last Saturday of March, I was working a double shift. It was a busy weekend at the office. An owner had a filing emergency, and I was the person who could handle it. I got home at 9:30 at night, my feet aching, and I sat on the couch and opened my phone to a bank notification that should not have existed. Account balance $412. I read it 3 times, then I opened the full app and looked at the transaction history. There were 4 transfers across 2 days. The amounts were specific: $8,000, $7,000, $4,000, and $3,200. The recipient on every transfer was a joint account in my parents' names. I had added them to that account years ago as backup beneficiaries during a medical scare. A precaution, a trust, a thing I had done because I believed they would never misuse it. I sat on that couch for 45 minutes without moving. Then I called my mother. She answered on the second ring, which told me she was not asleep and was possibly expecting the call. I asked her very quietly what had happened to my account. There was a pause, then she said, "Patricia, we had to move fast. The venue had a cancellation and the deposit was due by Friday. We knew you would want Renee to have this. We are going to pay it back, you know we are good for it." I asked her how much they had taken. She said the number like she was reading a grocery receipt: $21,588. I said nothing for a long moment. Then I said, "You did not ask me." She said, "We knew you would say yes." I said, "You did not ask me." She said, "Patricia, you are the responsible one. You always come through for this family." I said, "I am going to call you tomorrow," and I ended the call. I did not sleep that night. I lay on my side in the dark and I held Daniel's hand and I told him everything. He did not yell. He got very still and very quiet, which was the way Daniel got when something serious had landed. He said, "Patricia, this is not something small." I said, "I know." He said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I do not know yet, but I know I need to think clearly." That sentence, "I need to think clearly," became the thing I kept returning to over the next several weeks, because the pressure to not think clearly started almost immediately. My mother called the next morning. She said my father wanted to talk to me and put him on. My father's voice was warm in the way it got when he needed something. He said Renee was over the moon. He said the venue was beautiful. He said the deposit had saved the whole thing from falling apart. He said, "You know how much this means to your sister." I said, "Dad, you used my money without asking me." He said, "It stays in the family." I said, "That is not what I said." He said, "Patricia, you are being dramatic. We are going to pay it back. Give us 6 months. 6 months." I had worked 5 years for that money. I had missed vacations and new winter coats and a trip Daniel and I had wanted to take for our first anniversary. And the payback plan was 6 months, offered casually like it was already settled. I told my father I needed to think. I got off the phone. I went to work. I sat at my desk and I thought very carefully. The first thing I did was call my bank. I explained the situation. They told me that because I had listed my parents as joint account holders with transfer permissions, the transfers were technically authorized. There was no fraud protection that applied in the usual sense. The account access had been mine to give, and I had given it. The customer service representative was kind about this. She said she was sorry. I thanked her and hung up and stared at the ceiling for several minutes. The second thing I did was find an attorney. Not immediately, but within the week. A friend from work had used a family law attorney for something years earlier and gave me the name. I called the office, made an appointment, and went by myself on a Thursday evening. I told the attorney the full situation. She listened without interrupting. Then she asked me several specific questions. She confirmed that because the account access had been a technical permission I had granted, a civil claim was possible but would require demonstration of intent and circumstances. She said the most important thing right now was to close that access immediately and to document everything, every conversation, every text, every message. She said, "Keep your own records. Do not delete anything. Do not escalate yet, just document and protect." I walked out of that office feeling something I had not expected to feel. Not anger, not sadness, clarity, like a fog had been around me for a long time and a window had opened. The third thing I did was remove my parents from every financial account I had. I spent one Saturday morning changing beneficiary designations, closing joint access, updating everything. It took 3 hours. When I was done, I sat at the kitchen table and felt both lighter and heavier at the same time. Then the family pressure arrived in its full form. It started with Renee calling me 2 weeks after the bank transfer. Her tone was bright and oblivious in the way that made me wonder how much she actually knew. She wanted to talk about bridesmaid dresses. She talked about colors and fabrics and whether the ceremony would be indoors or outdoors. She talked for 11 minutes without once mentioning money or my account or anything that had happened. I listened. I gave short answers. I got off the phone as quickly as I could without being rude. 2 days later, my Aunt Gloria called. Aunt Gloria was my mother's older sister, and she had always played the role of family diplomat, which really meant she delivered messages my mother did not want to deliver herself. Gloria said she had heard things were a little tense and she just wanted to check in. I said everything was fine. She said, Patricia, your mother is worried about you. She said this is such a happy time for Renee, we do not want any cloud over it. I said, I understand. She said your parents are going to pay everything back, you know that. I said, Aunt Gloria, I appreciate you calling. I am handling things on my end. We love each other and I will see everyone soon. And I ended the call pleasantly and completely. Then came the group chat. Someone in my family had started a group chat called Renee and Marcus Forever that included 17 relatives. Within days, it was full of excited messages and venue photos and color swatches and gift registry ideas. Every few messages, my mother or Aunt Gloria would tag me and say something like, Patricia is so supportive of this, or we are all so lucky to have Patricia in this family. I read every message. I responded with a thumbs up reaction when it felt necessary. I said nothing else. I was being publicly tagged as the generous, supportive one while privately having had my savings emptied without consent. I wrote everything down, every tag, every message, every date and time. The engagement party happened in the second week of April. It was held at the venue my parents had put the deposit on with my money. It was a beautiful space, exposed brick, warm lighting, round tables with flower arrangements and glass vases. I attended, I wore a green dress, I smiled at the right moments. I hugged Renee and told her she looked wonderful. I shook Marcus's hand and wished them well. I sat next to Daniel and I ate the food and I watched my family celebrate my sister's love story with a backdrop that my savings had purchased, and I did not say a single angry word. But I also did not pretend everything was fine in private anymore. Daniel and I had a long conversation that night when we got home. He said, Patricia, how long are you willing to wait? I said, until I know exactly W. How I am doing, he said, do you want me to say something to your parents? I said no, not yet, he nodded, he trusted me. That mattered more than I can explain. In May, something changed. I had been documenting everything. I had the text messages from my mother the day after the transfer where she acknowledged what she had done. I had the phone call recording. I had started recording calls in my state after checking the recording laws, and my state permitted single-party consent. I had 3 recorded calls where my parents referred to the money, the amounts, and the plan to pay it back in 6 months. I had the bank statements. I had the attorney's notes. I had built a file that was quiet, thorough, and complete. In May, my parents came to me with a request. They wanted me to co-sign a loan, not for Renee's wedding, for a catering deposit. They had run into an issue with one of the vendors and the payment was due and they needed my credit to make the loan work. My father called. He said it was just a formality. He said my credit score was excellent and it would not affect me and they would handle the payment themselves. He said it in the same warm tone he used when he told me they were going to pay back $21,000 in 6 months. I said I needed a few days to think. I called my attorney. She said absolutely not. She said co-signing would create a liability trail that would complicate everything and signal that I was operating as a financial partner in something I had not consented to. She said the answer needed to be no, clearly and without lengthy explanation. I called my father back 2 days later. I said, Dad, I am not going to be able to co-sign the loan. He went quiet. Then he said, Patricia, this is for your sister. I said, I understand. I still cannot do it. He said, we are family. I said, yes, we are, and I love this family, but I cannot co-sign this loan. He said, you are being selfish. I said, I hear you. My answer is no, and I ended the call calmly. That was the first time in my adult life I had said a clear no to my father and held it. My hands were shaking when I put the phone down, not from anger, from something more complex than anger, from the feeling of a muscle being used for the first time after a very long rest. What followed was the most intense family pressure I had experienced since childhood. My mother called and cried. She said she could not believe how I was acting. She said Renee's wedding was the most important event in our family's near future. She said I was casting a shadow on something that should be joyful. She said she had always known I was difficult and she had always tried to love me past that. That sentence landed somewhere specific inside me. I had always known I was difficult. She had always tried to love me past that. I wrote it down that night, word for word, with the date and time. Renee called 3 days later. For the first time, she acknowledged that she knew about the money. She said, Patricia, I know Mom and Dad borrowed from you and I know that was not ideal, but can we please not let money ruin what is supposed to be a beautiful time? She said borrowed. She said it like they had taken a cup of sugar and planned to return it Thursday. I said, Renee, I love you and I want your wedding to be beautiful. She said, so you will drop this? I said, I did not say that. She said, what does that mean? I said, it means I love you and I want your wedding to be beautiful. And I meant both sentences equally and completely. Aunt Gloria sent a written message this time, a long one about family unity and the sacrifices parents make and the things that matter when all is said and done. It was well written. It was emotionally sophisticated. It was also a pressure document designed to make me feel small for protecting myself. I read it twice. I saved it. I did not respond to it. By June, 4 months had passed since the transfer. Not a dollar had been returned. I went back to my attorney. We discussed the civil small claims process and what a demand letter would look like. She drafted a formal letter that stated the situation clearly. The dates of the transfers, the amounts, the verbal acknowledgement my parents had made on recorded calls, the agreed-upon repayment timeline they had not honored, and a formal request for repayment in full within 30 days or the matter would proceed to the next legal step. It was not threatening. It was factual. It was polite in the way that legal documents must be polite, which is a kind of politeness that is harder to dismiss than emotional begging. She sent it to my parents by certified mail. Two things happened when that letter arrived. The first was that my mother called me screaming. Not upset, screaming. She said she could not believe I would take my own parents to court over money. She said, "What would people think?" She said this was a betrayal. She said she had sacrificed her whole life for me and this was how I repaid her. I let her speak. I did not interrupt. When she finished, I said, "Mom, I love you. I also need my money back," and I ended the call. The second thing that happened was that my father came to my apartment. He did not call first. He knocked on my door on a Tuesday evening. I looked through the peephole and I saw my father standing in the hallway with his hands at his sides, not angry, just present. I opened the door. I did not invite him in immediately. I stood in the doorway. He said, "Patricia, let's talk." I said, "Okay." We sat at my kitchen table. Daniel was home, but he stayed in the other room, which was the right instinct. My father looked older than I had noticed recently. He looked like a man who had recently understood something he did not want to understand. He said, "We made a mistake." I said, "Yes." He said, "We should have asked you." I said, "Yes." He said, "We thought you would say yes." I said, "You might have been right, but you did not give me the choice." He nodded. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "We do not have the full amount right now." I said, "I know. That is why there is a payment plan in the letter." He said, 30 days is too fast." I said, "The attorney set that timeline based on the original 6-month promise you made in March. We are now in June." I said it without emotion, just information. He said, "Are you really going to take us to court?" I said, "I hope I do not have to." He said, "What does that mean?" I said, "It means I hope we can resolve this between us, but I need it resolved, not promised, resolved." He left an hour later. He did not hug me. He did not say, "I love you." He walked out the door and down the hallway and into the elevator, and I stood at the doorway watching him go. I felt sad. I want to be honest about that. I felt sad the way you feel when something that should be simple is not, when love is complicated by money and power and old patterns and pride. I also did not chase after him. The following week, my parents sent the first payment. It was $2,000. It came with no note, no apology, just a bank transfer. I documented it. My attorney noted it. The legal process moved to a pause while payments were being made. But something else was happening at the same time, something I had not planned for. Word had gone out among the extended family that a legal letter had been sent. I do not know who told who or how, but by July, relatives I had not spoken to in years were reaching out. Some were supportive. Two cousins sent me private messages saying they respected what I was doing. One aunt, my father's sister, called me and said she had always worried about this dynamic in the family and she was glad I was standing up for myself. These messages were quiet and kind, and they mattered more than I expected. Some relatives were not supportive. I received 2 messages from people who said I was tearing the family apart. I did not respond to those. Renee's wedding was scheduled for September. It was now July. The family was in a kind of suspended tension. The wedding planning was continuing. Renee was oblivious or choosing to appear oblivious, and the venue and the dress and the flowers were all still happening, partly funded by money that had come from my account. Payments were trickling in from my parents, small amounts, inconsistent, nothing close to the full sum. Then in early August, something happened that I had not anticipated. Marcus, Renee's fiancé, reached out to me. He sent a message through his personal account that said, "Patricia, I want you to know I only recently learned the full truth of how the engagement party was funded. I am deeply uncomfortable with what happened. I do not want to begin my marriage with this. I asked Renee about it and she confirmed it. I am sorry this was done to you. If there is anything I can do to help resolve this before the wedding, I want to try." I read this message 4 times. Marcus was a quiet man who did not make large gestures. The fact that he had written this privately without anyone knowing told me something important about his character. I replied briefly. I thanked him for reaching out. I told him the situation was being handled between me and my parents. I told him I genuinely wished him and Renee well. He responded with one line. He said, "I just want you to know that not everyone in this situation thinks what happened was acceptable." That line stayed with me. In August, I also had two things happen in my own life that the family drama had nearly crowded out. The first was that my company offered me a promotion. I was asked to become a regional operations manager overseeing 3 offices. It came with a salary increase and additional responsibility and a title that meant something to me not because of the prestige, but because it was proof that my quiet, consistent work had been seen. I said yes. The second was that Daniel and I had been quietly, carefully planning our own wedding, separate from all the family. We had chosen a date in November. We had chosen a small venue, a garden space attached to a historic building 20 minutes from our apartment, capacity of 60 people, clean and beautiful in hours. We had set a budget from Daniel's savings since mine had been significantly compromised, and we had been methodical and calm about it. We told only a small number of people. We sent formal invitations by mail. My parents received their invitations in mid-August. My mother called the next day. Her tone had shifted again. Now it was softer, almost careful. She said she was so happy we had set a date. She said she had been worried with everything that had been happening. She said she was looking forward to being there. I said, I am glad, Mom. She said, we will need to talk about the guest list. I said, the guest list is finalized. She said, surely there is room for a few of your father's cousins. I said, the venue seats 60 people. Our list is at 60. She said, Patricia. I said, Mom, the list is set. She paused. Then she said, of course, sweetheart. It was the first time in my memory that she had said of course and then stopped. The payments from my parents continued in August, irregular but continuing. By the end of August, they had returned $8,000. $13,588 remained. Renee's wedding happened in September. I attended. I wore a gold dress. I stood in the ceremony and watched my sister marry Marcus with a genuine smile because I was happy for Renee and I was happy for Marcus, and I was not a person who needed other people's joy to be ruined in order to feel that mine was real. I danced at the reception. I hugged Renee. I told her she was beautiful, and she was. At the reception, my mother found me near the cake table. She said, Patricia, you are glowing tonight. I said, thank you, Mom. She said, I want you to know that your father and I are going to make this right. I said, I know you are. She said, we love you. I said, I love you too. And I meant it. Both things were true at the same time. I loved my parents and I needed them to make this right, and neither truth canceled the other. In October, something happened that became the final shift. My father called me on a Wednesday afternoon. His voice had changed from the warm pressure version and the formal apology version. This time he just sounded tired. He said, Patricia, your mother and I have been talking. We know what we owe you. We know we cannot pay it back fast enough before your wedding. He said, we want to give you something else. He said, we want to put you in our will for the value of what we owe, above and apart from whatever Renee and you would normally receive. We want it documented. We want it legal. He said, I know that does not fix now, but I want you to know we are not pretending this disappears. I said, I appreciate that, Dad. He said, we are also going to make a payment this week, larger than the ones before. 3 days later, $5,000 landed in my account. The week after that, $3,000. The week after that, $2,000. By the end of October, my parents had returned $15,000. The remaining $6,588 was formalized in a notarized document their attorney drew up, acknowledging the debt and attaching it to their estate in the way my father had described. It was not everything, but it was real, it was documented, it was not a promise in the air. My wedding happened in November. It was 61 people because one of Daniel's colleagues had also been invited and I had misjudged the final count, and we simply added one more chair. The garden space was lit with small warm lights strung between old wooden structures. The November air was cool and clean. I wore a dress I had found in a small bridal shop, not the first one I tried, not the most expensive one, just the one that made me feel like myself. Daniel cried when he saw me at the end of the aisle. I did not cry until I heard him say his vows, and then I cried very quietly with my whole chest. My parents were there. They sat in the third row. My mother had a new dress. My father looked tired but present. When I walked past them, my father touched my hand briefly, just touched it, a light pressure, not a grab, and I kept walking, not away from him, just forward. The ceremony was everything I had wanted it to be, quiet and honest and completely ours. At the reception, after the dinner, after the toasts, my mother came and found me at the edge of the dancing area. She said, it was beautiful, Patricia. I said, thank you, Mom. She said, you planned this by yourself. I said, Daniel and I planned it together. She nodded. She looked at her hands for a moment and then looked back at me. She said, I know I did not make this year easy for you. I said, it was a hard year. She said, I want to do better. I said, I want that too. It was not a movie moment. Abadi was crying dramatically. There was no big monologue. It was just two women standing at the edge of a dance floor in November, saying honest sentences to each other for possibly the first time in their adult lives. I am going to tell you what happened in the months after, because the story does not end at my wedding. By February, my parents had fully repaid the remaining $6,500. The total repayment of $21,588 was complete. My attorney confirmed it in writing. The notarized estate document was voided when the debt was settled. I paid my attorney her full fee from a portion of the returned funds and thanked her sincerely. The remaining money went back into savings. Not the same account, a new one with no joint access, with new beneficiary designations that had nothing to do with family access permissions. Renee and I have a different relationship now. It is still a relationship. We talk, we see each other, but there is a transparency between us that did not exist before. She knows I love her and she knows I am not endlessly available for use. She said something to me once in a private conversation that I want to share because it was unexpected and it mattered. She said, Patricia, I think I let them use you my whole life because it was easy and I never asked them not to. I said, I know. She said, I am sorry for my part. I said, I believe you and I do. My father and I have a quieter relationship than we used to. Less performance, less warmth as pressure, more honest. He calls me on Sundays sometimes. We talk about small things. He never mentions the money. I do not bring it up either. What happened is not forgotten, but it has been handled, and there is a difference between something that is over and something that has been resolved. What we have now feels more like resolution than either of us expected to reach. My mother and I are still navigating. She is a woman who loves deeply and measures love through what people do for each other, which is both her gift and the way she has caused the most pain. She is trying to learn a different language of love at 72 years old. That is not nothing. I give her credit for trying. I also give myself credit for not pretending her trying means the work is already done. My promotion was official in January. I started the regional role in February and spent the first month learning 3 different office systems and meeting people who had no idea what my personal year had looked like. It was good to be somewhere that valued my competence without the weight of family history attached. Daniel and I are in the first year of our marriage. It is not perfect, nothing real is perfect. We have disagreements and weeks where we are both tired and moments where we have to choose to turn toward each other when it would be easier to turn away. But we choose it. And that choosing, more than the ceremony and the flowers and the November lights, is what a marriage actually is. What I want to leave you with is not a list of lessons, because I have always found lesson lists a little too tidy for the messiness of real life. What I want to leave you with is an image. In my apartment above the desk where I do my work at home, there's a small whiteboard I put up when I first moved in. For years, there was a single sentence on it, save with purpose. I wrote it there as a reminder for myself on the nights when spending felt tempting and the long goal felt far. After everything that happened, after the empty account and the attorney and the legal letters and the careful payments and the wedding and the conversations at the edge of dance floors, I erased that sentence. I stood in front of the whiteboard with the eraser in my hand, and I thought about what had really been learned. Then I wrote 4 words instead. The 4 words were, protect what you build. And every morning when I sit down to work, I see those words and they mean more than savings. They mean your time, your effort, your peace, your relationships, your truth. They mean all of it. Protect what you build, not with walls and coldness, but with clarity, with honesty, with the willingness to say no when no is the only true answer. I built $22,000 with 5 years of quiet sacrifice. Someone I loved spent it without asking. I did not scream about it. I did not disappear. I did not fold either. I found out the truth. I talked to the right people. I made a plan. I held the plan. And eventually, the truth did what truth always does when you stop hiding it and start using it carefully. It landed. And when it did, what I got back was not just my money. It was the version of myself who finally understood that being the responsible one does not mean being the one everyone else gets to draw from. It means being the one who takes care of herself first, so that anything she chooses to give is given freely with open hands and never taken without her knowing. That is Patricia's story, and that is Patricia. If Patricia's story reached something in you today, if you recognize that family dynamic, that quiet sacrifice that everyone praised but nobody protected, I want you to leave a comment below. Tell me which moment hit you the hardest. Was it the bank notification? Was it the father at the kitchen table? Was it the 4 words on the whiteboard? Or was it something else, something between the lines that reminded you of your own story? You do not have to explain everything. Just let me know you were here and that you heard her. Because Patricia heard herself finally, and that changed everything.